when Michael Jordan entered his own sneaker store dressed like an ordinary man and watched 15-year-old Isaiah Brooks clutch 7 months of hard-earned savings before being driven back into the rain as though his dream did not belong there, he realized that the most painful failure of his legacy was not that his employees had failed to recognize him, but that they had forgotten how to recognize the worth of a human heart. The flagship store was still pulling in impressive revenue week after week, the kind of numbers that made the board smile and the accountants nod with satisfaction. But behind those glowing figures, something quieter and more painful was happening. Returning customers had dropped sharply. People who once came back for new releases or to bring their kids were staying away. Michael Jordan sat alone in his office late that afternoon, scrolling through a growing stack of complaint emails. One after another, regular folks described the same hurt, being followed around the store like they didn't belong, being dismissed with cold looks, or straight up asked to leave because of their clothes, their accents, or the way they looked. A single mom wrote that she was told her excited little girl was making too much noise for this environment. A working man in paint-splattered boots said an employee blocked him from even touching a display. Each message carried the same sting of embarrassment and rejection. Michael felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. These weren't strangers. They were the very people his brand had always claimed to inspire. He kept reading, the screen light reflecting in his eyes. The complaints weren't loud or angry for the most part. They were tired, hurt. Some customers said they saved for months just to walk out feeling smaller than when they walked in. Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck. The success on paper suddenly felt hollow. What good was a flagship store if it closed its doors in people's hearts? Then he opened one more email, and the whole room seemed to go still. Inside was a simple pencil drawing from a child. It showed the sneaker store glowing bright under its fancy lights, shoes displayed like treasures. Outside, standing alone in the pouring rain, was a young boy, small shoulders slumped, face turned toward the warm glow he couldn't reach. Beneath the picture, in careful, shaky handwriting, the boy had written just one sentence. "I thought those shoes were made for kids with dreams. Maybe I misunderstood." No name, no signature. Just those honest, heartbreaking words from a child who had believed in something bigger than himself. Michael stared at the drawing for what felt like forever. His throat tightened. He could almost hear the rain hitting the boy's shoulders, could almost feel the disappointment sinking deep into a young heart that had dared to hope. That kid wasn't asking for handouts. He just wanted to feel like he belonged, like the dream was for him too. The message hit Michael harder than any business report ever had. It reminded him of his own childhood, of doors that sometimes felt shut before he even knocked. He folded the paper gently, running his thumb over the creases. Without a word to his assistant, Michael canceled the board meeting he had scheduled for that afternoon. He stood up, changed into an old, faded jacket he hadn't worn in years, and put on a pair of simple reading glasses. Then he grabbed his keys and walked out alone. No security detail, no advance calls to the store manager. He wanted the truth, raw and real. As he drove through the city streets, the first drops of rain began to hit the windshield. "I don't need another report," he said quietly to the empty car, his voice low and determined. "I need to see how they treat someone they believe has no power." His hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. The weight of that child's drawing sat heavy in his mind, the hope that had been crushed, the quiet pain no sales chart could measure. On the passenger seat beside him lay the boy's drawing, creased from having been folded and unfolded many times. Michael glanced over at it again and again as the wipers swept back and forth. In that moment, the legendary champion wasn't thinking about championships or business deals. He was thinking about one small boy standing in the rain, and about the promise his own name was supposed to carry. The store lights were waiting ahead, but tonight Michael was going in as just a man. No fame, no power, no protection. He needed to see the truth for himself. The rain was coming down hard in Charlotte, turning the streets into shining rivers and soaking Michael to the bone as he stepped out of his car. He pulled his old jacket tighter around his shoulders and walked into the flagship store like any other person looking for shelter from the storm. The place felt more like a cold museum than a store meant for real people. Every pair of shoes sat locked behind spotless glass cases, lit up perfectly like precious artifacts, too valuable for ordinary hands to touch. The air smelled of fresh polish and money. No one greeted him. Not a single employee looked up or offered a simple welcome in from that rain. Michael stood there dripping on the polished floor, feeling the chill settle deep in his chest. He moved slowly through the quiet aisles, his worn shoes leaving faint wet prints behind him. Then he stopped in front of a vintage pair of Jordans, the kind that brought back memories of his own journey. For a moment, he just looked at them, remembering what it felt like as a kid to want something so badly it hurt. He reached out gently, not to grab, just to feel close to that piece of history. That's when Rachel appeared, stepping out from behind a display like she had been waiting. Her eyes didn't meet his face. They dropped straight to his faded jacket, his scuffed shoes, and the rainwater pooling around his feet. In those first few seconds, Rachel had already made up her mind about who he was. She saw a man who didn't belong, someone who had wandered in just to get out of the weather, not to buy. The judgment was quick and quiet, the kind that cuts without raising a voice. Michael felt it like a weight pressing on his shoulders, but he stayed calm, his face steady, even as disappointment rose in his throat. "Those models aren't for customers who are only here to browse," Rachel said, her tone cool and final. Michael looked at her for a long moment, his voice low and even. "Do you usually decide who qualifies as a customer before they speak?" She crossed her arms, barely blinking. "I simply prefer not to waste your time. Or mine." The words landed heavy in the quiet store. Michael didn't raise his voice or argue. He just stood there, letting the moment settle, feeling the sting not just for himself, but for every person who had ever been sized up and pushed aside in a place that was supposed to lift people up. His heart ached thinking about that boy's drawing again, the one still folded in his pocket. How many others had walked in full of hope only to be met with this same cold wall? Behind the counter, Malik stood frozen, quietly studying the man's face. Something about those eyes, the way he carried himself even in old clothes, felt strangely familiar, like a memory trying to break through. Malik's brow furrowed, but he stayed silent, watching as the rain continued to fall outside and the tension inside the store grew thicker than the storm clouds overhead. The tension in the store still hung thick in the air as Malik stood behind the register, his heart beating a little faster than usual. He watched the man in the faded jacket carefully, taking in his height, the familiar way he carried his shoulders, the calm but strong tone of his voice, and those hands that looked like they had worked hard for everything they ever earned. For one impossible moment, a wild thought crossed Malik's mind. This could actually be Michael Jordan. The resemblance was too close, the quiet dignity too real. His stomach twisted with nerves and excitement. He took a small step forward, ready to say something, anything, but one sharp warning look from Rachel stopped him cold. She gave him that familiar glare that said, "Stay in your place." And just like that, Malik lowered his head and drifted back behind the register, doubt flooding in. What if he was wrong? What if speaking up only made things worse for everyone? He swallowed hard, the chance slipping away as shame started to settle in his chest. From the stockroom doorway, Sophie had heard every word of the exchange. She stood frozen among the boxes, her hand gripping her phone so tightly, her knuckles turned white. This wasn't the first time she had witnessed something like this. She had already written 3 formal reports about how customers were being treated in the store, polite, detailed accounts of people being followed, judged, and pushed out. None of them had led to any real change. The higher-ups always brushed it off or closed the cases without a word. Sophie's heart ached as she watched the man stand there with quiet strength. She thought about pulling out her phone and recording what was happening, finally getting proof. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but then she slowly lowered the phone back into her pocket. The fear of losing her job, of rocking the boat too hard, won again. She turned away, another chance to do what was right, disappearing into the quiet hum of the store lights. Nearby, Anya moved slowly with her cleaning cloth, trying to make herself invisible. She had seen that exact cold expression on Rachel's face before, the one that sized someone up and decided they weren't worth the time. Rachel had given her the same look on her first week, making her feel small and out of place. Anya's mind raced to her mother back home, the stack of medical bills that kept growing no matter how many extra shifts she worked. If she lost this job, her mom might not get the medicine she needed. She kept her head down, wiping the same spot on the glass over and over. In her heart, she whispered to herself, "If I stay silent through one more shift, my mother will have medicine for another week." The words felt like a heavy chain around her chest, but they kept her rooted in place. 3 good people, Malik, Sophie, and Anya, knew deep down that something was deeply wrong in that moment. They could feel the unfairness in the air, the way one man was being quietly erased right in front of them. Yet each of them found a reason to look away, to stay silent, to protect the fragile lives they were trying to hold together. The store stayed bright and perfect on the surface, but inside, another small piece of humanity quietly faded as the rain continued to fall outside. The rain had eased into a steady drizzle as 15-year-old Isaiah pushed open the heavy glass door of the flagship store, his old backpack slung over one shoulder and his heart beating with quiet hope. Tucked safely inside that backpack was a plain white envelope holding $312, money he had earned over 7 long, exhausting months. He had mowed lawns under the hot sun until his back ached, delivered newspapers in the early morning dark, and stayed up late tutoring younger kids who struggled with math. Every dollar carried a piece of his determination. Isaiah wasn't dreaming of fame or fancy things. He just wanted a solid pair of basketball shoes for the upcoming tryouts at school, something that would let him run without slipping and jump without worrying about worn-out soles. For the first time in a long while, he felt proud walking into a place like this. He believed today might be the day his hard work finally paid off. Rachel noticed him the moment he stepped inside. She moved fast, following close behind the boy like an unwelcome shadow. She positioned herself firmly between Isaiah and the displays of the more expensive shoes, her eyes narrowing as she looked him over. "Have you even looked at the prices on these?" she asked, her voice carrying that familiar edge of doubt. Isaiah froze, the excitement in his chest starting to slip away. When he gathered his courage and politely asked if he could try on a pair in his size, Rachel didn't bother checking the stockroom. She simply gestured toward the entrance with a small, dismissive wave of her hand. "The outlet outside the city may have options that are more realistic for you," she said coldly. Isaiah's face burned with shame. He stood there for a second, clutching the strap of his backpack. "You haven't even asked how much I saved," he replied, his voice shaking just a little as he fought to keep it steady. "I don't need to ask," Rachel answered, already turning away like the conversation had wasted enough of her time. The words hit Isaiah hard, crushing the joy he had carried for 7 months in a single moment. All those blisters, early mornings, and sacrificed weekends suddenly felt worthless. His eyes stung with tears he refused to let fall in front of her. He turned away quickly, too quickly, and the envelope slipped from his backpack, hitting the polished floor with a soft thud. A few bills spilled out beside it. Malik, standing behind the counter, saw it happen. He stepped forward and picked up the envelope, noticing the loving sentence written across the front in Naomi's careful handwriting. "You earned this money yourself. Walk in there with your head held high." His throat tightened as he held the evidence of a mother's pride and a boy's hard work. But Isaiah was already running out the door, disappearing back into the gray rain without looking back. Michael watched the entire scene from a quiet corner of the store, his heart aching as the boy vanished into the wet streets. Then his eyes fell on the small drawing on the front of the envelope, a simple pencil sketch in the exact same style as the unsigned picture he had received weeks earlier. The connection hit him like a quiet thunderbolt. That lonely boy standing in the rain outside the bright store wasn't just any kid. It was Isaiah. And in that moment, Michael felt the weight of everything that had gone wrong in his own store pressing down on him, heavier than ever before. The store felt even colder after Isaiah ran out into the rain. Michael stood quietly for a moment, then walked up to Rachel with steady steps. "I'd like to speak to the person responsible for how this store operates," he said calmly, his voice low but clear. Rachel looked at him with a tight smile, already assuming the worst. In her mind, this man in the old jacket was just another person trying to cause a scene so he could complain later and ask for free shoes or money. She'd seen it before, or at least she thought she had. Without hesitation, she signaled the two security guards standing near the entrance. "Please escort this gentleman out," she said loud enough for nearby customers to hear. One of the guards, Tony, hesitated. He had been watching the whole time and noticed that Michael had stayed completely calm. The man hadn't raised his voice, hadn't touched anything he shouldn't, and hadn't done a single threatening thing. Tony leaned toward Rachel and spoke quietly. "Is this really necessary? He hasn't caused any trouble." Rachel shot him a sharp look and repeated the order right there in front of everyone. "Escort him out, now." Michael didn't fight or argue. He simply nodded and walked toward the entrance with the guards beside him. At the door, he paused and looked up at the big clock on the wall. The minute hand was slowly ticking forward. He turned back toward Rachel and the watching employees, his eyes steady and serious. "The minute hand has 9 marks left before it reaches the next number," he said in a calm, measured voice. "When it does, every employee will be waiting in the break room, no exceptions." Rachel let out a short, mocking laugh. "By the time you return, perhaps the rain will have learned to ask permission before entering." Michael looked at her for a long second, his expression quiet but heavy with something deeper than anger. "I don't think you'll find that sentence amusing for much longer," he answered softly. There was no yelling, no dramatic scene, just those quiet words hanging in the air as Michael stepped out into the rain. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than it should have. Customers exchanged uneasy glances. Tony shifted uncomfortably on his feet. Even Rachel's confident smile faltered for just a moment as she watched the man disappear into the gray afternoon. Something about his calm certainty left an uneasy feeling in the store, like the first rumble before a real storm finally breaks. In that moment, the door didn't just close on one man, it closed on the illusion that everything in the store was just fine. Inside his car, the rain drummed steadily on the roof as Michael sat for a moment, staring at the store through the windshield. His heart felt heavy with everything he had just witnessed. Without wasting another second, he picked up his phone and made the first call. Olivia Grant, the company's director of operations, answered right away. Michael's voice was firm but tired. "Olivia, I need you to get representatives from Human Resources, Legal Affairs, and Regional Management to the flagship store in Charlotte immediately. No excuses. I want them there as fast as they can move." He didn't explain much more. He didn't need to. The tone in his voice told her this was serious. As he hung up, Michael felt the weight of leadership pressing down on him. This wasn't just about one bad moment. It was about a pattern that had been hurting people for too long, and he knew he had let it go on under his own name. The second call went to his security and tech team. Michael demanded every piece of security footage from the past 6 months, not just the clips from today. "Pull it all," he said. "I want to see how customers have really been treated." He also asked them to identify the 15-year-old boy who had just run out into the rain. "Find him quickly and quietly. That kid deserves better than what happened today." His voice caught slightly as he remembered the way Isaiah's shoulders had slumped when he left the store. Then came the final call. Michael dialed customer support and carefully read the case number written on the back of the child's drawing. The employee on the other end typed it in and confirmed the details. The drawing had been submitted 3 months earlier by a young student who chose not to give his name. Michael thanked the person softly and ended the call. He looked down at the envelope still sitting on the passenger seat, the one with Isaiah's hard-earned money and his mother's loving note. As he studied the small pencil drawing on the front of the envelope, the pieces finally came together. The simple lines, the lonely boy standing in the rain outside the bright store, the exact same style as the unsigned picture he had received. It was Isaiah, the same boy who had worked 7 months for $312, the same boy who had just been turned away like he didn't matter. Michael felt a deep ache settle in his chest. "Don't search only for what they did today," he said quietly into the phone during one of the calls, his voice thick with emotion. "Find every person who walked out of that store, too ashamed or too exhausted to tell anyone what happened." In that quiet moment inside the car, the 9-minute countdown continued ticking away. Michael wasn't angry in the loud way people expected. He was heartbroken, responsible, and more determined than ever to make things right. The rain kept falling, but something bigger was about to change inside that store. The man whose name was on the building had finally seen the truth, and he wasn't going to look away anymore. The minutes after Michael left the store felt heavier than the rain still falling outside. Inside, the air was thick with unease. Malik couldn't stay quiet any longer. He pulled Sophie into a corner of the stockroom, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. "That man, Rachel, just had thrown out. I think it might have been Michael Jordan." His voice was barely above a whisper, full of disbelief and fear. The height, the eyes, the way he spoke, even in those old clothes, it was too familiar. Sophie stared at him for a second, then shook her head quickly. "Come on, Malik. That's impossible. Guys like Michael Jordan don't just walk in here dressed like that. You're seeing things because you're nervous." She tried to laugh it off, but her voice didn't sound convinced. Deep down, a small seed of doubt had already been planted. Then, through the front windows, they saw it. 3 sleek black corporate vehicles pulling up slowly in front of the store. The doors opened, and well-dressed people began stepping out, their faces serious. Sophie's face went pale. The joke suddenly didn't feel funny anymore. A cold wave of fear washed over both of them as they realized this might actually be real. Meanwhile, in the back office, Darren was moving fast. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he secretly logged into the store's internal system. He found the policy he was looking for and highlighted it. Closely monitor customers who show signs of limited purchasing ability. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He was trying to delete it, to make it disappear before anyone higher up could see it. If this really was Michael Jordan coming back, that instruction could cost them all their jobs. Just as he was about to hit delete, Sophie walked in and caught him. "Are you protecting your job?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger and disappointment, "or burying whatever remains of your conscience?" Darren looked up at her, his eyes hard but tired. "A conscience doesn't pay rent." Sophie stood there, staring at him with a mix of sadness and frustration. "Rent won't help you live with the person you're becoming," she said softly, the words cutting deeper than any shout could. Darren's hand froze over the keyboard. For a moment, the truth of what she said seemed to hit him, but the fear of losing everything kept him frozen in place. A few feet away, Anya quietly slipped a folded piece of paper into her pocket. On it were the names and short descriptions of 17 customers she had secretly written down after watching them be mistreated over the past few months. She had thought about sending that list to corporate so many times, late at night when the guilt kept her awake, but every time, courage failed her. The fear of losing her job and not being able to help her mother with medical bills always won. Now, with the corporate cars outside and the clock ticking, she pressed the paper tightly against her side, her heart racing with regret and quiet shame. The break room clock showed only 12 seconds remained on the 9-minute mark. The entire store felt like it was holding its breath. Fear hung in the air like smoke. No one spoke. Everyone could feel that something important, maybe even life-changing, was about to walk back through that door. And this time, there would be nowhere left to hide. The 9 minutes ended exactly on time. The glass door of the store swung open, and the entire atmosphere changed in an instant. Olivia Grant, the human resources director, and the company's legal advisor walked in first, their faces serious and focused. Right behind them came Michael. He had taken off the old hooded jacket that had hidden who he really was. Now he stood tall in the simple clothes underneath, his presence filling the store without him saying a single word. The entire place fell deathly silent. Customers stopped browsing. Employees froze where they stood. The only sound was the soft hum of the lights and the distant patter of rain outside. Everyone could feel it. This was no ordinary visit. Rachel's confident expression crumbled the moment she saw his face. Her mouth opened slightly, color draining from her cheeks as the realization hit her like a wave. This was Michael Jordan, the man she had ordered out into the rain just minutes ago. She stepped forward quickly, her voice shaky and desperate. "Mr. Jordan, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was you. If I had recognized you, I would have acted completely differently. Please, let me explain." Michael didn't raise his voice. He simply reached into his pocket and placed 2 items gently on the counter: the child's wrinkled pencil drawing and Isaiah's envelope with the $312 inside. The store stayed completely quiet as he looked at her. His eyes carried a deep sadness rather than anger. "The problem is not that you failed to recognize me," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying through the silent store. "The problem is that you saw another human being clearly and still decided he was unworthy of respect." Those words landed heavily on everyone present. Rachel's apology died in her throat. She stared at the drawing of the lonely boy in the rain, then at the envelope, and for the first time, the weight of what she had done seemed to truly sink in. The customers nearby watched with wide eyes, some nodding quietly, others looking uncomfortable. The air felt thick with truth that could no longer be ignored. Michael turned to the rest of the staff. "Everyone into the break room," he said firmly. "Now." No one dared argue. They moved quickly, heads down, the usual excuses already dying on their lips. Michael made it clear. No one was allowed to prepare a story or explanation. There would be no rehearsed defenses. When the last employee had filed in, Michael stood at the front of the room and looked at each of them. His presence felt both powerful and deeply personal, like a father who was disappointed in his own house. "Today," he said slowly, "I don't want the stories you've been telling yourselves. I want the truth the cameras recorded." The break room, once a place for quick lunches and small talk, had become something else entirely, a quiet courtroom where excuses would no longer be enough. Michael stood tall, the weight of his own responsibility showing in his eyes. He wasn't there to punish for the sake of power. He was there because he cared about what his name stood for, and because a boy's broken dream in the rain had finally forced him to look closer. The real reckoning was just beginning. The break room felt smaller than usual as everyone gathered around the large screen. Michael stood at the front, calm but serious, while the security team played the footage. 6 months of store life were compressed into just 6 painful minutes. One clip after another played, showing a heartbreaking pattern that no one could deny. A tired construction worker in dusty boots was told to stick to the cheaper shoes in the back. A black mother shopping with her young daughter was asked to open her handbag in front of everyone, her little girl watching with wide, confused eyes. A disabled veteran with a cane was completely ignored by the staff, who assumed he wasn't there to buy anything. Then came the worst one, a little girl, no older than 8, carefully counting out coins on the counter to buy her father a birthday gift. Instead of kindness, a couple of employees laughed quietly at her, making her small shoulders shrink in embarrassment. Each clip landed like a quiet punch to the gut. The room stayed completely silent except for the low sound of the video. Michael didn't say anything at first. He simply let the pictures speak for themselves. Then the camera angles shifted, and the truth became even harder to watch. Malik, Sophie, and Anya appeared in many of the recordings. They never directly insulted the customers or joined in the cruelty, but they were always there, standing close enough to see everything. They watched. They stayed silent. They looked away. Michael paused the footage on each of their faces, freezing their expressions in time. The guilt on the screen was impossible to hide. Malik stared at his own image, his shoulders slumping lower with every second. Sophie's eyes filled with tears as she saw herself turning away from a mother who had been followed around the store. Anya's hands trembled in her lap. Michael's voice finally broke the heavy silence. "One cruel person can create a victim," he said slowly, his words carrying both sadness and strength. "But 5 decent people remaining silent can create an entire system." The room was so quiet you could hear hearts breaking. Anya began to cry softly, tears running down her cheeks as the weight of her choices finally crashed over her. Malik could not lift his head. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, shame burning in his chest. They had told themselves they were just trying to survive, just doing their jobs, just staying out of trouble. But the screen didn't lie. Their silence had helped build the very walls that pushed people out. Then came the most heartbreaking moment of all. The footage showed Isaiah on his knees, frantically picking up his fallen money from the polished floor. His hands shook as he gathered the bills and coins he had worked 7 long months to earn. Nearby customers watched him with uncomfortable stares, as though he had done something shameful just by being there. The boy's face, full of hurt and embarrassment, stayed frozen on the screen. No one had helped him. No one had spoken up. In that quiet break room, the image of Isaiah on his knees said more than any words ever could. Michael let the video run a few seconds longer before pausing it. The pain in the room was real now. No excuses, no hiding, just the raw truth of what had been happening in the store that carried his name. And for the first time, many of the people sitting there finally understood the real cost of looking the other way. The break room stayed heavy with silence after the footage stopped playing. Rachel shifted uncomfortably in her chair, then tried to speak up, her voice defensive at first. She insisted she had only been doing her job, protecting the store's sales numbers and keeping that luxury image the brand was known for. "We can't let just anyone walk in and treat this place like a shelter," she said, still trying to justify herself. "I was thinking about the business, about what this store is supposed to represent." Michael listened quietly, then reached into a folder Olivia had brought and pulled out a printed email. He placed it on the table in front of Rachel without saying a word. It was an email she had written herself. "Not everyone who enters the store should automatically be treated as a customer." The words sat there, cold and clear, for everyone to see. Rachel's face went pale as she read her own lines. The room felt even smaller. What she had called protecting the brand now looked like something much uglier on paper. Michael looked at her with a mix of disappointment and resolve. He didn't raise his voice, but his words carried real weight. Rachel's employment was terminated immediately. This wasn't about her insulting the owner, it was about something deeper. She had taken her personal prejudice and turned it into store policy, hurting real people who simply wanted to be treated with basic respect. Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes as the reality hit her. "I have 2 children," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please give me a chance to change." Michael paused, his expression softening just a little, but his decision remained firm. "You need to change," he said gently yet clearly. "But you cannot continue learning that lesson by hurting more customers. Become the mother your children can be proud of, but begin somewhere else." The words hung in the air. Rachel sat there stunned, realizing this moment would change her life. There was no yelling, no dramatic scene, just the quiet finality of consequences for choices she could no longer take back. She gathered her things with trembling hands and left the room, the door closing softly behind her. Darren was next. He shifted nervously in his seat before admitting the truth. He had known Rachel was wrong, but he had actively supported her anyway because he wanted a promotion. He had helped keep the toxic environment alive out of fear and ambition. Michael looked at him with steady eyes. "You're not being fired simply for feeling afraid," Michael told him. "You're being dismissed because you used your authority to preserve everyone else's fear." Darren's shoulders dropped. The excuse he had repeated in his head for months suddenly sounded hollow. He had chosen comfort and career over doing what was right. And now he had to face the cost. He left the room quietly, the weight of regret following him out the door. When it was over, only Malik, Anya, and Sophie remained. The 3 of them sat there, hearts pounding, waiting for what Michael would say next. But he didn't offer them forgiveness. He didn't tell them everything would be okay. He simply looked at each of them with a quiet, serious gaze that carried both understanding and expectation. Their silence had played a part too, and that truth still needed to be faced. The price of power wasn't just losing a job. It was looking at yourself in the mirror and realizing how many people you had quietly hurt by choosing not to speak up. In that moment, the break room felt less like a place of punishment and more like the beginning of something harder, real change. Michael wasn't finished yet. The healing, for those who stayed, would take time, honesty, and courage, and none of them knew if they were ready for it. The break room had grown quiet after the difficult decisions. Michael stood up slowly and asked Olivia to bring something from his car. A few minutes later, she returned, carrying an old, worn shoebox that looked like it had been kept for many years. Michael took the box gently, almost reverently, and opened it in front of everyone. Inside were a pair of old leather dress shoes, carefully repaired several times with simple white thread. The stitches stood out clearly, telling a story of love and resilience that money could never buy. The room stayed silent as people leaned in slightly, curious but respectful. Michael looked down at the shoes with a soft expression, memories flooding back. "When I was young," he began, his voice warm but thick with emotion. "My mother saved up for months to buy me these shoes. I had an important job interview coming up, and she wanted me to look my best." He paused, running his fingers lightly over the white stitches. "We walked into a store together. The employee took one look at my mother's worn purse and suggested we go somewhere more suitable. She didn't argue or raise her voice. She simply reached into her purse, took out every dollar she had saved, and counted the money onto the counter, bill by bill, with quiet dignity." The story hung in the air, touching something deep inside everyone listening. You could almost picture that young Michael standing beside his proud mother, feeling the sting of being looked down on. His mother's strength in that moment had left a mark that never faded. After they left the store that day, she gave her son a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. She looked him in the eyes and said, "Don't remember the face of the man who looked down on us. Remember this feeling. One day, when you're strong enough to open doors for others, never become the person standing in front of them." Michael's voice grew quieter as he finished the story. He reached over and carefully placed the old shoes right beside Isaiah's envelope on the table. The two items sat side by side, one representing the shoes of a child who had once been underestimated, the other holding the hard-earned savings of another child who had suffered the same kind of quiet humiliation decades later. The image was powerful and heartbreaking. Two generations connected by the same pain, the same hope, and the same unfair judgment. Many of the employees had tears in their eyes. The old shoes with their white thread suddenly made everything feel very real. This wasn't just business or policy anymore. It was personal. It was about human dignity and the responsibility that comes with success. Michael stood there, connecting his mother's quiet strength to Isaiah's crushed dreams, showing everyone in the room what true legacy really meant. In that moment, the break room felt less like a place of judgment and more like a classroom of the heart. The old shoes, stitched with love, sat as a silent witness, a reminder that the doors we open or close for others will always matter more than the name above them. The weight of the old shoes in Isaiah's envelope still lingered in the room. One by one, the remaining employees began to speak. Malik went first, his voice thick with emotion as he looked down at his hands. He told them about his younger brother who played basketball every day in torn sneakers, held together with old tape. The boy's shoes were falling apart, but he still ran with all his heart. Every single day when Malik came to work, he told himself he was enduring this difficult environment so he could save enough money to buy his little brother a proper pair. It was his quiet reason for staying silent, but today, when he watched Isaiah being humiliated, a boy who reminded him so much of his own brother, he had done nothing. "I kept telling myself I was silent for my family," Malik said, his voice cracking. "But if my little brother had seen me today, he might have been ashamed to wear anything I bought him." The confession hit hard. Malik's eyes were filled with regret. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was simply laying the truth on the table, raw and painful. The room felt the weight of his words. A man who had convinced himself his silence was noble, only to realize it had betrayed the very person he was trying to protect. Next, Sophie reached into her bag and pulled out 3 folded papers. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed them in front of Michael. These were the 3 formal complaints she had submitted over the past months about how customers were being treated. Michael looked through them carefully and confirmed what she already knew. Each one had been quietly closed by regional management without any real investigation, no follow-up, no change. Sophie had done the right thing, but the system had failed her. Michael looked at her with genuine sorrow. He accepted responsibility for building a workplace where people who tried to report wrongdoing were forced to protect themselves instead of being protected. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That should never have happened." Sophie nodded, tears in her eyes, but she didn't ask for mercy. She simply wanted the truth to be known. Then Anya stepped forward. She reached into her pocket and placed a wrinkled piece of paper on the table. On it were the names and short descriptions of 17 customers she had secretly written down after witnessing them being mistreated. Her voice was soft but steady. "I wrote down their names because I was afraid I would forget them," she said. "But remembering without acting is only a more sophisticated form of silence." The room was completely still. Anya's quiet courage in keeping that list, even when fear kept her from sending it, touched everyone deeply. Michael looked at the 3 of them, Malik, Sophie, and Anya, with respect, but he did not promise forgiveness. He did not offer easy words to make them feel better. Honesty is the first door, he said gently, not the final destination. These were 3 confessions that carried no pleas for mercy. They were honest admissions of failure, spoken from the heart by people who were finally facing themselves. The confessions didn't erase what had happened, but they opened a small crack in the wall of silence that had stood for too long. Michael sat with them in that heavy silence, letting the weight of their words settle. Real change, he knew, would not come from quick forgiveness. It would come from the difficult, daily work of becoming better than they had been the day before. And for the first time in a long while, all 3 of them felt ready to begin. The break room door suddenly flew open with a force that made everyone turn their heads. Naomi stepped inside, still wearing her hospital scrubs, her face tired from a long shift, but burning with a mother's fierce love. Right behind her stood Isaiah, his hair still wet from the rain, eyes lowered to the floor. He looked small and defeated. Naomi didn't glance around the room or show any awe at the fact that Michael Jordan was standing right in front of her. To her, he was simply the owner of the place that had made her son feel worthless. Her eyes locked directly on Michael with quiet strength and barely contained pain. The room grew even quieter. Everyone could feel the raw emotion radiating from this mother who had come straight from work, still in her uniform, to stand up for her child. Naomi took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice steady but filled with years of sacrifice. She explained how Isaiah had worked for 7 long months, mowing lawns in the blazing sun, delivering newspapers before dawn, and tutoring younger kids late into the night. He had refused to take any money from her because he knew she was already stretching every dollar to pay for his younger sister's medical bills. That $312 wasn't just saved money. It was proof. Proof that her son could work towards something beautiful and earn it for himself. The shoes he wanted weren't just shoes. They were a symbol of his dignity, his pride, and his belief that hard work could open doors. Her words painted a vivid picture of a boy who had pushed through exhaustion and sacrifice only to have that hope crushed in a matter of minutes inside this store. Several employees lowered their heads, tears forming in their eyes. Malik especially felt the story deep in his chest, thinking again of his own little brother. Then Naomi looked straight at Michael, her voice trembling with quiet anger and deep hurt. I can repair my son's clothes. I can work another night shift. I can give him half my dinner. But I don't know how to repair a child's dignity after adults tear it apart. The accusation was simple, honest, and impossible to deny. It landed heavily on everyone in the room. There was no defense Michael could offer that would make this right. He stood there, absorbing her pain without looking away. I won't ask you to forget this, Michael replied, his voice low and sincere. I'm only asking for the opportunity to accept responsibility before I ask you to trust me again. The words were humble. They didn't try to fix everything in one moment. Naomi studied his face for a long time, her eyes searching for truth. Isaiah remained silent behind her, still hurting, but listening carefully. In that break room, a mother's love and pain had cut through all the corporate talk and brought everything back to what truly mattered, how we treat one another, especially the young and the hopeful. Michael didn't rush her. He simply stood there, letting her words and her presence fill the space. This wasn't about business anymore. It was about healing a wound that had been opened in a child's heart, and in a mother's. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, real accountability had walked through the door wearing hospital scrubs and carrying a mother's unbreakable courage. The room was still heavy with Naomi's words when Isaiah slowly reached into his old backpack. His hands trembled a little as he pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was half of a Michael Jordan poster, the one that used to hang proudly above his bed. After running out of the store earlier, hurt and ashamed, Isaiah had torn it in half in a moment of pain. One half was still taped to his bedroom wall. He had brought the other half back with him. The torn edge was jagged, like the hurt he was carrying inside. Everyone watched in silence as the boy held up the damaged poster. It was a powerful, heartbreaking symbol of how deeply the afternoon had wounded him. Isaiah looked up at Michael, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. His voice was quiet but honest when he finally spoke. "I didn't tear it because I hate you," he said, his words catching in his throat. "I tore it because looking at it made me feel stupid. I believed people like you would understand kids like me." The simple confession from a 15-year-old boy hit harder than anything else that day. Michael stood speechless for a long moment, the weight of those words pressing down on him. He didn't try to repair the poster. He didn't offer quick excuses or try to make the moment lighter. He simply let the torn paper speak for itself. A child's broken trust laid bare in front of everyone. Then Michael did something no one expected. He lowered himself slowly to Isaiah's eye level, kneeling so they were face to face, man to boy. The legendary athlete, the billionaire, the global icon, on his knees in front of a teenager. His voice was gentle, full of genuine regret. "You are not obligated to keep seeing me as a hero," Michael said softly. "Today I failed to protect what my name was supposed to represent. I'll have to earn back your trust one day at a time." Those words became the emotional climax of the entire day. Isaiah's lip quivered. Tears finally spilled down his cheeks, but they weren't tears of relief from an apology. He cried because a powerful man, someone he had once looked up to more than anyone, did not demand immediate forgiveness. Michael wasn't asking the boy to make him feel better. He was giving Isaiah permission to feel everything he was feeling without pressure to forgive on the spot. The room was completely still except for the sound of Isaiah's quiet sobs. Naomi placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder, her own eyes filled with tears. Malik, Sophie, and Anya watched with heavy hearts, deeply moved by the humility they were witnessing. In that moment, something shifted inside the break room. A powerful man choosing to kneel and own his failure without demanding grace in return touched everyone present in a way no speech or policy change ever could. Isaiah's tears were the purest kind, the release of a boy who had carried disappointment far too heavy for his young shoulders. Michael stayed at eye level with him, patient and quiet, letting the boy cry. This wasn't about fixing the image on the poster. It was about mending something much deeper, the faith a child once had in the world. And for the first time that day, real healing felt possible, even if it would take time, patience, and consistent action to earn back what had been broken. Michael looked at Isaiah with deep respect after the boy's tears had slowed. He gently offered him the exact pair of shoes he had wanted earlier that day. "They're yours," Michael said softly. "No charge." But Isaiah shook his head. Even at 15, he stood firm. "I can't take them for free," he replied, his voice still a little shaky but clear. "If I accept them like that, it turns 7 months of hard work into an act of pity. I don't want pity. I want to earn what I get." The room was moved by the boy's quiet pride. Here was a young man who had every reason to take the easy way out, but he chose dignity instead. Naomi placed a hand on her son's shoulder, her eyes shining with a mix of exhaustion and pride. Michael nodded slowly, understanding completely. He thought for a moment and then suggested a compromise. "What if we sell them to you for $1? You can keep the rest of your savings." Isaiah looked down at the floor for a second, then lifted his head with a new idea in his eyes. His voice grew stronger as he spoke from the heart. "I want to pay the full price," he said, "but I want you to use the same amount to start a fund for kids who were pushed out of places because someone assumed they couldn't afford to belong." The entire room fell into a respectful hush. Michael's eyes softened with admiration for this boy who had every right to be angry, but instead chose to think about others. Without hesitation, he accepted Isaiah's $312. Then, he made a promise that left everyone stunned. "The company will match it 1,000 times," he said. "This will be real." Isaiah thought for a moment, then gave the fund its name. "Call it the Open Door Fund." He didn't want it to be just about handing out free shoes. He wanted it to be much bigger than that. The fund should offer scholarships, career training, counseling, and mentorship. Most importantly, it needed to create safe spaces where children could talk openly about the times they were judged, excluded, or made to feel like they didn't belong. Isaiah looked at Michael with quiet determination. "Don't just give us shoes," he said. "Help us believe we have the right to walk through any door." Those words became the heartbeat of the new fund. They captured everything the day had been about, not charity that made people feel small, but opportunity that lifted them up with dignity. Michael felt a deep sense of hope rising in his chest. What had started as pain and humiliation was slowly turning into something meaningful. Naomi wiped her eyes, watching her son stand taller than he had all day. The employees in the room sat in awe of this 15-year-old boy who had turned his hurt into a vision for helping others. In that moment, the Open Door Fund was born, not from a corporate meeting, but from the honest heart of a boy who refused to let his pain be the end of the story. Michael shook Isaiah's hand, not as a famous athlete, but as a man learning from a child. The $312 that had once lain scattered on the floor now carried the seed of real change. And for the first time that long, difficult day, the store felt like it might finally become a place where doors truly opened for everyone. Michael looked at Malik, Anya, and Sophie with a serious but fair expression. The room felt heavy with anticipation as he laid out their choices clearly. They had two options. The first was to leave with full financial support and clean employment records. No black marks, no difficult explanations to future employers. The second was to stay for a 6-month probationary period under direct community supervision. There would be no guarantee they could keep their jobs. It would be difficult, uncomfortable, and full of real accountability. The three of them sat quietly for a moment, letting the weight of the decision settle over them. This wasn't an easy way out. Michael was making sure they understood that staying didn't automatically mean they had been forgiven. Malik spoke up first, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I want to stay," he said. He wasn't trying to save his career. He didn't even mention money or job security. Instead, he looked at Anya's list of 17 names and said he wanted to personally apologize to every single customer who had been mistreated. He wanted to look them in the eyes and take responsibility for staying silent when he should have spoken up. The old Malik who had looked the other way was gone. This was a man ready to face what he had done no matter how painful. Anya surprised everyone when she raised her head and spoke without lowering her voice. For the first time, she sounded strong and clear. She asked to lead the new customer welcome team. She wanted to be the first person to approach anyone who walked in looking uncertain, uncomfortable, or afraid. No more hiding, no more making herself invisible. Her phone suddenly rang in the middle of her words. It was her mother calling from Poland. Anya answered it right there, and for the first time in years, she told the full truth about what had happened at work, the fear, the silence, the regret, and her decision to stay and change. "I may lose my job today," Anya said into the phone, her voice trembling but proud. "But for the first time in years, I don't feel as though I am losing myself." Her mother listened quietly on the other end, then replied with the kind of love only a mother can give. "I need medicine, but I need my daughter to live with her heart still whole even more." Those simple words brought fresh tears to Anya's eyes. In that moment, she felt truly free. Not because everything was fixed, but because she had finally chosen integrity over fear. Sophie was the last to speak. She had been thinking carefully the whole time. When she finally talked, her voice was determined and practical. She demanded that every future complaint be sent at the same time to store management, community representatives, and an independent review board. No more quiet dismissals. No more things getting swept under the rug. Michael listened closely and agreed without hesitation. He respected her desire to build a better system that actually protected people instead of punishing those who tried to do the right thing. The three of them had chosen to stay, but the atmosphere in the room made one thing very clear. Staying did not mean they had been forgiven. Their past silence still mattered. The 6 months ahead would test them every single day. There would be no easy path forward. Michael wasn't offering comfort. He was offering a real chance to become better people and help rebuild something honest. As the meeting ended, a quiet sense of hope mixed with nervousness filled the break room. Malik, Anya, and Sophie had each taken their first real step toward redemption. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, they felt like they were walking through the right door, even if the road ahead was still uncertain. The first 3 months after the changes were painful. Sales dropped noticeably. Several wealthy customers complained loudly that the store no longer felt exclusive. They missed the old atmosphere where they felt special and everyone else felt invisible. The board of directors began pressuring Michael hard. They wanted him to reduce the new community space and fill it with more product displays. "This is a business, not a charity," they kept saying. The pressure grew stronger every week, and for a moment, it felt like everything might slip back to the way it used to be. Malik faced the same kind of choice again. A regional executive pulled him aside one afternoon and offered him a big promotion if he would support the plan to cut the community area. 3 months earlier, the old Malik probably would have agreed without thinking twice. The promise of more money and a better title would have been too tempting. But this time was different. Malik looked at the pen the executive offered him, then slowly set it down on the table. "If we remove a table where children do their homework so we can add another wall of shoes," he said firmly, "then we've forgotten why we rebuilt this place." His words carried the weight of real growth. The executive looked surprised, but Malik didn't back down. He had changed, and he wasn't willing to trade his integrity for a title anymore. The real test came when the Youth Advisory Council, now led by Isaiah, held a vote on the proposal. The young people listened carefully, discussed the idea seriously, and then voted strongly against reducing the community space. It became the first real test of whether the community voice had genuine authority or was just there for decoration. Everyone waited to see what Michael would do. Cutting the space could save millions in potential revenue, but supporting the kids might cost the company dearly in the short term. Michael didn't hesitate. He stood with Isaiah and the council. Even though the decision could hurt the bottom line, he backed them completely. The message was clear. This time, the community's voice actually mattered. Just when things looked difficult, success came from another direction. Sophie, using her sharp mind and determination, redesigned the stockroom and storage system completely. She found a way to create more retail space without touching the community area at all. Her smart solution impressed everyone. Slowly, local families started returning to the store. They felt welcomed. They saw their children doing homework at the tables. They felt respected. Sales began to rise again, not from chasing wealthy customers, but from people who now trusted the store with their hearts as well as their money. In the middle of all this, Malik had a quiet, emotional moment that meant the world to him. He bought his younger brother a new pair of basketball shoes and sent them with a heartfelt letter. In it he wrote, "I don't want you to be proud of these shoes. I want you to be proud that your brother finally learned how to stand upright in his own." When his little brother called him later, crying happy tears, Malik felt something heal inside his chest. The changes were working. Not perfectly, and not without struggle, but they were working. The store was slowly becoming a place that lived up to its name, and the people inside it were becoming better than they once were. The day everything almost returned to the way it was had passed. Thanks to courage, creativity, and a willingness to stand for something bigger than profit, a different future had won. A few days before the big reopening ceremony, Michael received a simple envelope in the mail. It was a letter from Rachel. He opened it carefully and read it in the quiet of his office. She did not ask for her job back. She did not request Isaiah's forgiveness. Instead, she wrote honestly about her new life. She now worked at a support center for unemployed women, helping them rebuild after difficult times. For the first time, she said, she understood what it felt like to have someone look at her resume and decide she wasn't worthy of another opportunity. The experience had humbled her deeply. The woman who once closed doors on others was now walking through them herself, learning every day how painful rejection could be. Her words carried real regret, but also the beginning of growth. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was simply sharing her truth. Inside the envelope was something even more touching, a colorful picture drawn by her 8-year-old son. It showed two boys of different races standing together, smiling as they held a door open for each other. Underneath the drawing, in careful childish handwriting, he had written, "Mom says strong people are not the ones who block the door." Michael stared at the drawing for a long time. The simple message from a child carried more power than any corporate apology ever could. It showed that change was happening in Rachel's home too. An apology that demanded nothing, no forgiveness, no second chance, felt more honest than anything she had said before. Later that day, Michael sat down with Isaiah and gently asked if he wanted to read Rachel's letter. The boy hesitated for a moment, then took the paper and read it slowly. When he finished, he stayed quiet for a while, thinking carefully. He did not say he had forgiven her. He did not offer kind words to make everyone feel better. Instead, he spoke with a wisdom that seemed far beyond his 15 years. "Maybe she's beginning to change," Isaiah said softly. "But that is a road she has to walk herself. I don't have to stand at the end of it waiting for her." His response was mature, honest, and deeply moving. In that moment, Isaiah showed that healing does not require forgetting what happened. It does not mean the victim has to forgive on someone else's timeline. True healing could exist even when forgiveness was not given. Michael respected the boy's boundary completely. He didn't push. He simply nodded with understanding and pride. This quiet conversation between Michael and Isaiah became one of the most important moments in the whole journey. It taught everyone watching that real change doesn't always come with neat, happy endings. Sometimes it comes with boundaries, patience, and the freedom to let people walk their own paths toward becoming better. Rachel's letter and her son's drawing would stay with them as a reminder that doors can be opened again, but only when the person who once closed them does the hard work themselves. The reopening ceremony was approaching, but this small exchange felt like its own kind of quiet victory. A victory not of perfect forgiveness, but of honest growth, respect, and the courage to move forward without forcing the heart to lie. 6 months later, the flagship store reopened with a new name and a new heart, the Open Door Center. The transformation was beautiful. It was no longer just a place to sell shoes. It had become a space that combined smart business with real community service. The walls, once covered only with pictures of celebrities and star athletes, now proudly displayed photographs of ordinary customers alongside short stories of the obstacles they had overcome. The store felt warmer, more alive, and truly welcoming. During the reopening ceremony, Anya stood confidently in front of hundreds of people. Her mother had flown in from Poland and sat in a wheelchair near the front, watching with tears in her eyes. For the first time, Anya spoke without lowering her head or letting her voice tremble. She welcomed everyone with genuine warmth, her mother beaming with pride beside her. The woman who once chose to become invisible had found her voice, and her courage. Later that day, Isaiah brought both halves of his old Michael Jordan poster. He didn't tape them back together the way they used to be. Instead, he carefully placed a new photograph in the middle, a picture of himself standing at the youth council, speaking with confidence. He looked at Michael and said with quiet strength, "I used to need a hero on my wall. Now I want that wall to remind me that I can become someone who opens doors for other people too." Michael smiled softly and stepped back. He did not stand beside his own image. He let Isaiah stand proudly in the center, where he belonged. It was a powerful, emotional moment, the passing of a torch from one generation to the next. After the ceremony ended and most people had gone home, the final test quietly walked through the door. An elderly man wearing paint-stained clothes entered hesitantly, looking a little nervous. He asked if the store had any shoes cheap enough for his grandson, who practiced basketball every day in shoes full of holes. This became the true final test of everything they had worked so hard to change. Malik approached the man with a warm smile. He didn't look at the man's worn clothes or old shoes. He simply pulled out a chair and said kindly, "What is your grandson's name? Before we discuss the price, tell me about his dream." Anya brought the elderly man a warm drink. Sophie quickly found information about the Open Door Fund and explained how it could help. Isaiah, without being asked, went into the stockroom himself and carefully selected the right pair of shoes. Michael watched everything from a quiet distance. He didn't need to give a single order. His team knew exactly what to do. The change had become real. It lived in them now. As the evening grew late, Michael quietly slipped out of the store. Outside, rain had begun falling again, just like it had on the day everything changed. He stood for a moment under the awning, pulled out his phone, and looked at a photograph of his mother's old shoes. He whispered softly, "You were right, Mom. A door only truly belongs to us when we are brave enough to open it for someone else." Inside the store, the elderly man called his grandson, his voice shaking with emotion. "Come here, son. They said we didn't walk into the wrong place." The glass door opened once more. Warm light poured out onto the rain-covered street, welcoming the boy as he ran toward his grandfather. A legacy is not the name written above the entrance. A legacy is the way a stranger feels when walking through the door beneath that name.